The boy was starving. Rain clung to his skin like a second colder layer. His shoes squeaked with every step, soles cracked from too many winters. And still, when he found the dog shivering skeletal and silent, he tore his only sandwich in half and placed it on the wet pavement. Not because he expected anything in return. Not because it made sense. But because kindness for some souls is instinct. That decision made in the middle of a forgotten alley under a flickering street lamp would echo louder than any storm. Because that dog wasn't just a stray. And that boy wasn't just a nobody. Together, they were about to change each other's fates. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments? And if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. Mariners Bluff, Oregon, a coastal town drenched in early winter drizzle. The wind howled down the narrow lanes of Mariners Bluff, dragging a curtain of icy rain through the early morning darkness. The town sat quiet under the weight of gray clouds, the glow of street lamps warping against puddles that pooled in cracked sidewalks. It was the kind of coastal chill that crept into your bones and made every breath feel like a mouthful of mist. Eli Thompson, 16, pedaled down Lincoln Avenue on a battered red bike with a milk crate strapped to the back. Inside it, tightly bundled in twine, were the last copies of the Mariners Ledger. His hoodie was soaked through, clinging to his skinny frame, and his worn sneakers squeaked with each pump of the pedals. He had thick, unruly brown hair, pale skin, and eyes that had seen more responsibility than most kids his age. There was a quiet intensity to him. Shoulders slightly hunched, lips pressed thin, as if life had taught him not to expect too much. Eli lived at Maple House, the only group home in town. His mother had died when he was 9, and his father, who no one at the center ever talked about, had vanished into the system before that. Eli never complained. He worked, he studied, he survived. This morning, like every morning, Eli's stomach twisted with hunger. He hadn't eaten since yesterday's lunch, a stale muffin left over in the staff fridge. But in his pocket was a peanut butter and jelly sandwich wrapped in wax paper made from supplies he had scrounged together the night before. It was supposed to be breakfast. By the time Eli dropped the final paper at Mrs. Langley's porch and turned onto the alley behind the hardware store, the rain had gone from gentle to punishing. He ducked into the narrow cut of brick and concrete, parked his bike beside a tipped trash bin, and slipped onto the stoop behind an old laundromat to eat in peace. It wasn't glamorous, but it was dry mostly. He peeled the sandwich open with cold fingers, the scent of peanut butter making his mouth water. But just as he was about to take the first bite, he heard a faint whimper. It was so soft, it might have been the wind. But then it came again from behind the dumpster a few feet away. Eli stood slowly, cautious. He'd seen raccoons here before, but what he found this time made him freeze. There, half curled beneath a cardboard flap, was a golden retriever. The dog was drenched, its golden fur turned to a muddy, patchy mess. Its ribs showed clearly through its thin body, and its eyes, deep amber, almost human, looked up at him with a mix of fear and pleading. The dog couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old, though it looked twice that in its current state. Eli crouched. "Hey there, buddy," he murmured. The dog didn't growl or bark. It didn't even move, just watched him with wide, hollow eyes. Eli glanced at the sandwich, still in his hand, then back at the dog. He was starving. But this animal, this stranger, was starving more. Without another thought, he tore the sandwich in half and gently placed one piece on the pavement between them. The dog didn't hesitate. It lunged forward and devoured the offering in 2 bites, then looked up at Eli again, ears twitching as if waiting for more. "You get half," Eli said quietly, a weak smile forming. "That's fair, right?" He tossed the second half to the dog, who ate it more slowly. This time, more respectfully. Eli thought, almost as if it understood, this wasn't just a meal, but a gift. The rain softened to a drizzle. Eli leaned back against the brick wall, knees pulled to his chest, watching the dog lick the pavement clean. Something about it, its silence, its dignity, despite the condition it was in, pulled at him. He reached out a tentative hand. The dog flinched, but didn't run. Slowly, it leaned forward and nuzzled Eli's fingers. "Guess I'm not the only stray in this alley," Eli whispered. He didn't name the dog then. That came later. But something shifted in that moment in the space between hunger and kindness. On the other side of town, thick smoke still lingered in the charred remains of St. Augustine Care Home, a once-respected elder facility that had burned nearly to the ground a month prior. Most of the residents had been relocated or placed into temporary care, including one of its oldest patients, Walter McKinley. Walter, age 81, had once been a spirited teacher of history, the type of man who quoted Lincoln over coffee and corrected your grammar mid-sentence with a dry chuckle. But now he lived in the fog of early-stage Alzheimer's. Tall but stooped with pale blue eyes and wisps of silver hair, Walter moved slowly, his gait uneven but determined. He now resided at Bright Pines Transitional Care Center, a smaller, quieter place nestled between two churches. And every morning since his transfer he would sit by the east window, murmuring the same word over and over, Sonny. The nurses thought it was a memory, a place maybe, or a person. But Hannah Ross, one of the younger aides with an eye for detail and a soft spot for Walter, had begun to suspect otherwise. Hannah, 28, was petite, with curly red hair and warm brown eyes. She had grown up taking care of a grandmother with dementia, and knew the difference between confused mutterings and rooted memory. She watched Walter gently trace invisible shapes on the armrest and whisper the name again. Sonny, yellow fur, the storm, and something inside her told her this wasn't just a memory, it was a loss. That night, Eli smuggled the dog into the utility shed behind Maple House. It wasn't much, just some broken rakes and a thin blanket, but it was dry. He tucked the dog in, then whispered, "I should probably give you a name." The dog blinked at him. He paused, then grinned faintly. "Sonny, you look like sunshine if it got dunked in a mud puddle." The tail wagged once. Just once. But it was enough. The days in Mariner's Bluff slipped past in damp gray streaks, with the sun rarely breaking through the cloud-thickened sky. A cold, misty drizzle lingered in the air like a secret everyone in town had learned to live with. Eli Thompson moved through it like a ghost school group chores, the occasional delivery shift for extra cash, and each night always the same, a quiet detour behind the shed where Sonny waited, golden, fur-matted, but eyes shining brighter than before. Sonny had gained some weight since that rainy morning. Not much, but enough that his ribs didn't scream through his skin anymore. He still limped slightly, his left hind leg seemed stiffer on colder nights. But Eli noticed he wagged his tail now when he approached, and sometimes even let out a tiny whine of greeting. He never barked, never begged. He was silent, like someone who had learned long ago that noise got you hurt. At Maple House, secrecy was survival. The home, a 2-story colonial turned state-funded group residence, housed 15 children between the ages of 6 and 17. It was run by Miss Joanne Kilmer, a tall woman with iron-gray hair pinned into a tight twist, and a posture that had all the mercy of a prison warden. She wasn't cruel exactly, but she was cold. Some said her husband had left her years ago without a word, and she'd never trusted warmth again. When Miss Kilmer found Eli slipping a bowl of leftover pasta into a plastic container after dinner, she raised one eyebrow. "That's not for you, I assume," she said sharply. Her voice clipped like someone who measured every word for efficiency. Eli froze. Just saving it for later, he lied. She stared at him, unreadable, then nodded once and moved on. But 2 nights later it all came crashing down. It was just after curfew. Eli had snuck out back with a faded quilt he'd found in the laundry closet. Sonny was curled under the overhang, his nose buried in his tail, as Eli spread the quilt beside him, whispering, "It's not much, but it's warm." The light from the upstairs window flared on. A voice rang out behind him. Eli Thompson. What in God's name is that? He turned slowly to see Mr. Brad Geller, the night staff supervisor, standing by the back door. Mr. Geller was a stocky man in his 50s with a nose perpetually red from allergies and a voice that always sounded like he was telling a ghost story. His kindness was variable decent on good days, petty on the rest. Tonight, his breath steamed in the cold and his eyes narrowed beneath the porch light. "You brought an animal onto the property," he barked. "He's harmless," Eli replied quickly. "I didn't want him out in the cold. Doesn't matter. Geller cut him off. You know the rules. No strays, no exceptions. Ms. Kilmer hears about this. You're gone." That night, Eli slept with his clothes on, fully expecting to be woken up and sent packing. But the next morning, nothing happened. Geller hadn't reported him. Maybe he'd had a change of heart. Maybe he was waiting. Eli didn't care. He made sure to be more careful. Every evening, he saved a little from dinner, a half slice of bread, a scoop of mashed potatoes, the crust of a meatloaf, and smuggled it out after lights out. And each night Sonny waited, eyes alert, tail thumping gently when he saw Eli. But that night, the night it changed, began like the others. Eli had just slipped out the side gate, a soft roll tucked in his hoodie pocket when he heard the laughter. Sharp, juvenile. It came from the street. A trio of boys emerged from the fog. Eli recognized them immediately. Tanner Boyd, tall and wiry, with a lazy smirk, and a love for making people squirm. His 2 friends, Kyle and Benji, followed like shadows, never quite speaking unless prompted. "Where you sneaking off to orphan?" Boy Tanner jeered. "None of your business," Eli muttered, eyes on the ground. Tanner stepped closer, blocking his path. "What's that in your hoodie, huh?" "You holding out snacks," Kyle snorted. "Hey, maybe he's got a cat in there." Benji laughed. Eli tried to push past, but Tanner shoved him hard. He staggered, caught himself. "Leave me alone." But Tanner wasn't done. "Or what you gonna cry, run home to your—" "Oh wait, you don't have one." The punch was more verbal than physical, but it landed hard. Eli clenched his fists, breathing sharp and fast. Then behind them a growl, low, fierce. Not loud, but enough. Sonny stepped from the shadows, head-lowered teeth just barely visible beneath his lip. He looked like a ghost pulled from mist, his fur soaked from, waiting his eyes burning gold in the dim light. Benji took a step back. That your dog?" "Sort of," Eli said quietly. Tanner tried to laugh it off. "Whatever, he's old, probably got rabies." Sonny stepped forward, and Tanner flinched. "You know what? Not worth it," he muttered, turning away. "Let's bounce." Eli didn't move until the last of their footsteps vanished into the fog. Then he knelt beside Sonny, burying his face in the dog's wet neck. "You showed up just in time, huh?" Sonny licked his ear once and sat beside him like a sentinel. Meanwhile, across town, Walter McKinley stared at a fogged-up window inside Bright Pines. Hannah Ross approached with her usual warmth, clipboard in hand, coffee in the other. "You've been quiet today?" she said, sitting beside him. Walter didn't reply. "You remember Sonny today?" He blinked, then slowly his lips parted. "Golden." He was gold. "And the storm." Hannah nodded, writing it down. "You always mention the storm." Walter's fingers twitched against the chair's armrest. He didn't bark. She tilted her head. He didn't bark. He looked at her. Clear for a second. He never barked, even when the fire came. Hannah's heart skipped, That was new, a detail, specific. She leaned forward. Walter, was Sonny your dog? A slow nod. She hesitated, then asked what happened to him. He turned to the window again. He ran into the rain. And suddenly, Hannah wasn't just hearing a memory. She was hearing a story, one that hadn't ended yet. Rain came again, in sheets slashing across the rooftops of Mariner's Bluff like a punishment. The kind of cold that settled in the marrow unrelenting made everything feel heavier. Your coat, your breath, your choices. Eli Thompson pedaled through the gray streets with shoes that squished and a heart that thudded out of rhythm. He was late. Again. The newspaper bundle dug into his spine with every bump in the road, and he couldn't shake the voice of Mr. Daly, the editor of the Mariner's Ledger, from their last conversation. One more tardy Thompson, and that's it. I got a line of kids with dry shoes and working watches ready to take your spot. That had been last week, and here he was late again, the papers damp, the ink bleeding. Eli skidded into the alley behind the newspaper office, dropped the crate beside the back door, and locked up his bike. As he stepped inside, he was met by the narrow, beady-eyed glare of Mr. Arthur Daly, mid-50s, short, balding, always in a brown cardigan regardless of the weather. He was the kind of man who measured time in seconds and trust in pay stubs. "You're 27 minutes late," Daly said flatly, not even looking up from his clipboard. "I'm sorry, I don't care." Daly cut in, flipping a page. "You've had 4 chances. That's 3 more than I should have given you. You're done." Eli stood there soaked and silent. Daly finally looked up. "Don't make this harder. Go home, kid." Eli nodded, once lips pressed so tightly they hurt, and turned back into the rain. That night, under the tin roof of the garden shed, Sonny pressed his warm body against Eli's side, sensing something had shifted. Eli didn't speak. He couldn't. He just sat there, arms wrapped around his knees, face hidden in his hoodie, pretending the damp air was the reason his eyes stung. No job meant no extra meals. No extra meals meant trouble. At Maple House, meals were rationed. He had been stretching every dinner to cover Sonny's care, but without a steady income, that threadbare balance was gone. The next morning at school, he couldn't focus. The numbers on the whiteboard blurred. The words in his notebook meant nothing. At lunch, he stared at his tray and pushed the food around. The other students ignored him. That was normal. Eli didn't belong to any group, not smart enough for the AP kids, not angry enough for the rebels, not loud enough for the athletes. He was a shadow, even in daylight. After the final bell, he made a decision. That evening, he wrapped Sonny in the old quilt, tied a thin rope gently around his neck like a leash, and began walking toward the Mariner County Animal Shelter located on the edge of town, past the bus depot and the train yard. It wasn't cruelty, it was desperation. The shelter was run down, but serviceable. A faded sign swung in the wind above the gate, paint chipping around the edges. The smell of bleach and wet fur hit Eli as he pushed the door open. A woman behind the counter looked up, Marla Jessup, maybe late 30s, with soft eyes and a tired smile. She wore a gray sweatshirt with "Adopt Don't Shop" embroidered across the chest, and had dark blonde hair pulled into a messy bun. "Hey there," she said kindly. "Need help?" Eli hesitated. I found this dog. He's been living behind my place. I can't keep him." Marla looked down at Sonny, who sat quietly by Eli's side tail, tucked eyes wary. "He's a golden, huh? Poor thing looks like he's had a rough time." Eli nodded, but didn't speak. Marla walked around the counter and knelt beside Sonny. She reached out carefully, letting the dog sniff her fingers. Sonny didn't move. "He trusts you," she said, glancing up. "You sure about this?" Eli didn't answer. Instead, he bent and gave Sonny a gentle pat. "Come on," he whispered. But Sonny didn't move. Eli pulled slightly on the rope. "Sonny." Still, the dog stayed rooted. Then slowly he looked up at Eli, ears lowered, and let out a soft whine, the sound of a question of confusion, of why are you doing this? Eli's throat burned. I'm sorry. I thought this would be better. He gave the leash another gentle tug. Sonny took one reluctant step, then stopped again. His eyes never left Eli's. Something inside Eli cracked. Marla stood up quietly. You don't have to do this, you know. Not yet, Eli whispered. But what if I can't feed him anymore? Marla's voice softened. There's a food bank. Some shelters give out dog supplies, too. I can check. Look, we're always here. But he clearly belongs with someone. Maybe that someone's you. Eli looked down at Sonny, whose tail thumped once, just once. He didn't leave him there. Meanwhile, at Bright Pines, Hannah Ross sat in the staff office long after her shift had ended. She had pulled the file 2 hours ago, but now her hands finally trembled as she opened it. Walter McKinley, patient history, Dobb, June 9th, 1942. Admitted September 14th. Previous year, next of kin, deceased spouse, known possessions. One photograph of a dog, no name attached. She stared at the photograph. The dog in the image was young, sleek golden. It was unmistakably a golden retriever, and on the back of the photo, scribbled in faint blue ink, Sonny, protect her best friend, Storm Chaser. She leaned back in her chair. Her instincts had been right. She grabbed her laptop and opened the public news archive. Typing quickly, she searched St. Augustine Care Home fire and filtered by pets. Buried deep in the local records, she found it, facility dog missing after Blaze staff say golden retriever may have escaped during evacuation. No follow-up, no recovery. Until now. The rain had returned not in violent sheets this time, but in a slow, mournful drizzle that misted the sidewalks of Mariner's Bluff and blurred the world behind a soft gray veil. Puddles formed where cobblestone cracked, and the scent of wet earth mixed with salt from the nearby sea. The afternoon was quiet, the streets nearly empty, most people taking refuge indoors, sipping coffee, waiting out the cold. Eli Thompson wasn't one of them. He moved through the fog on foot, his red hoodie pulled tight over his ears, one hand loosely gripping Sonny's leash. The golden retriever trotted beside him, head low tail, flicking with mild curiosity at every drifting leaf or passing smell. He looked stronger now, his coat, less matted muscles beginning to return beneath his frame, but his eyes still carried that gentle, haunted depth. A survivor's gaze. Eli had no real destination. After the failed attempt at surrendering Sonny to the shelter, he'd decided he'd figure things out one day at a time. The food bank Marla had mentioned had helped a little, though it meant standing in line with grown men who had nowhere else to go, who looked at him like he was still too young to be this familiar with hunger. It didn't matter. He wasn't doing it for himself. As they crossed Oak Ridge Avenue, a flash of movement caught Eli's eye, a figure moving unsteadily on the opposite side of the street. An older man, tall but frail, clutching a metal walker with one hand and an umbrella with the other, moving at a painfully slow pace. A few steps behind him, a red-haired woman in a nurse's uniform rushed forward. Mr. McKinley waited slow down, but the man didn't stop. His name was Walter McKinley, and on days like today, rainy, low-pressure, memory-hazed, he often forgot where he was or why he was there. His tall frame, once proud and commanding, now leaned into each step like it might give out. His silver hair was combed neatly, but his hands trembled as he gripped the walker. The umbrella slipped sideways, and before the nurse could reach him, his foot caught on the curb. He stumbled. Without thinking, Eli ran. He didn't even hear his own shout, just the sound of his sneakers slapping through water and his heart slamming in his chest. Walter toppled sideways, the walker crashing down, his limbs collapsing like wet branches. Eli slid to his knees beside the man just before his head hit the pavement. "I got you," he gasped, catching Walter beneath the shoulders, steadying him. The nurse arrived seconds later, breathless. Hannah Ross, 28, wide-eyed, rain-soaked. Her curly hair stuck to her cheeks and her navy scrubs clung to her arms. She dropped beside them. "Is he okay?" Walter blinked up at them, dazed. His mouth opened and closed twice before any words came out. "The storm." He came back in the storm. Hannah gently checked his head for injuries. No cuts. Might be bruised. "Thank you," she said to Eli, finally meeting his eyes. Eli nodded, but didn't answer. Then, just behind them, there was a bark. Short, sharp, familiar. Walter's head turned. Sonny stood across the street, leash still dangling from his collar. He had stopped when Eli ran, sitting now on the edge of the sidewalk watching with intense focus. The rain slicked down his golden fur. Another bark, more insistent this time, and then he ran. Water splashed as the dog galloped toward them, ears back body, low eyes locked not on Eli but on Walter. Hannah instinctively reached out to block him, but Sonny veered and came to a sudden halt just inches from the old man. Walter's eyes widened. "Sonny!" The word escaped like a prayer. Sonny whined, once, then lunged forward, not to attack, not to defend, but to bury his head against the old man's chest. His body trembled. His tail wagged. Walter's hands lifted slowly, shakily. They found fur familiar softness, and he gasped as if a gate had opened in his mind. "It's you," he whispered. "You came back." For a long time no one said a word. Eli sat back, stunned. Hannah stared at the dog, at the old man, at the boy who had appeared from nowhere. Sonny, the silent stray who never barked, was licking Walter's fingers like a child reunited with a parent. And Walter, who had forgotten the names of nurses, doctors, even his wife some days, was now fully lucid, his blue eyes bright with a memory so vivid it crackled in the air. Hannah swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. You know this dog." Walter smiled through trembling lips. "He was mine. Before the fire. Before everything burned." Sonny wagged his tail harder, nudging into his chest again. Eli felt something rise in his throat that he didn't have words for. Jealousy, maybe. Fear, relief. Some strange mix of loss and love. He stood up slowly, unsure of where he belonged in the scene unfolding before him. But Walter reached for him too. "You brought him back." Eli hesitated. "He followed me. I fed him once. That's all." Walter chuckled, still stroking Sonny's ears. "That's all it takes." Hannah was still piecing the moment together, her medical training, clashing with the emotional storm, surging through her. She looked from Eli to Walter to Sonny and back again. "We need to get you inside," she said gently. "You're cold. You could have hit your head." Walter nodded absently, eyes never leaving the dog. Hannah turned to Eli. "Can you come with us? Just for a bit?" Eli looked at Sonny. Sonny looked back and took a step toward him. He was still Eli's dog, and Walter's. Somehow, impossibly, he was both. Eli nodded. "Okay." The clouds began to scatter in the sky above Mariner's Bluff, as if the storm had finally tired itself out. For the first time in weeks, golden light trickled through tree branches, reflecting off puddles that had long overstayed their welcome. The town, still soaked in grayness, seemed to hold its breath as the season inched toward something gentler. Inside a quiet office, nestled on the second floor of Bright Pines Care Center, Walter McKinley sat upright in a padded chair by the window, a thick manila folder in his lap. His eyes, clearer now than they'd been in years, moved slowly across the page lips, pressing into a firm, determined line. Walter, at 81, had regained more than just names and places. His sense of purpose had returned. In his youth, he had run one of the most respected estate planning firms in the state. Now the papers he held were the beginnings of a new chapter, not for himself, but for the boy who had brought his dog home. Across from him, Hannah Ross sat with her knees crossed, a legal notepad resting on her jeans. Since that rainy afternoon, her role had shifted. She no longer clocked out after 12-hour shifts. She'd resigned quietly last week, telling the director at Bright Pines that she needed to follow something more meaningful. No one questioned her. Her loyalty, dedication, and calming presence had spoken for themselves for years. Now she wore jeans and a soft flannel shirt instead of scrubs, her curls loose around her shoulders, and her voice lighter. There was something freer in the way she laughed these days. Walter set the papers down and reached for his cane, standing slowly. "We'll need to bring this to the county clerk," he said, tapping the folder. "But it's all there. Medical proxy, financial consent, educational grant, everything." "Are you sure?" Hannah asked gently. "It's a big step." Walter gave her a look, both soft and steel-edged. That boy shared the last of his food with a creature no one else would have touched. If that doesn't qualify him for a second chance, I don't know what does. Downstairs in the courtyard of Bright Pines, Eli stood beside a bench, one hand resting on Sonny's back as they both watched a squirrel dance across the grass. Eli wore a dark green hoodie Walter had given him, soft-lined with fleece, and far warmer than the threadbare thing he'd worn through most of the winter. His shoes were new, too. Black trainers, just a bit too big so he could grow into them. He wasn't used to clean things, or being noticed, or being wanted. So when Walter stepped outside and waved him over, the knot of disbelief in Eli's chest tightened. "Come here, son," Walter said, voice low but firm. Eli approached. Sonny followed close at his side as always. Walter handed him the folder. "That's for you." Eli took it slowly. Inside were documents he didn't fully understand, legal language, signatures, stamps. But Hannah leaned in and whispered, "It means you're not alone anymore." Walter cleared his throat. "If you agree, I'd like to become your legal guardian. We'll go through all the right steps. No shortcuts. You'll live with me, with Sonny. We'll get you back in school properly this time. I've already spoken with the board at St. Augustine Charitable Trust. There's a scholarship waiting." Eli opened his mouth, closed it. For the first time in his life, the weight of someone choosing him hit like a wave. "You want me?" Walter smiled. "You brought my family back. I think it's only fair I return the favor." Eli turned to Hannah. She nodded. "We'll do it together." Sonny, as if sensing the solemnity of the moment, sat between the two of them and gave a low, contented huff. Weeks passed. The paperwork, though not without complications, moved swiftly. Walter's name still carried weight in town, especially among lawyers and trustees who owed him favors. And when news spread of the reunion between a lost therapy dog and his elderly owner, facilitated by a homeless teen, people rallied behind the story. The Mariner's Ledger ran the headline, "Boy returns, dog after a year, lost in fire, finds a family instead." At Maple House, Eli returned briefly to collect what little he owned. Miss Kilmer, usually expressionless, gave him a long, hard look. Then, in a moment of surprising softness, she handed him a paper bag with a packed lunch and said, "Try not to screw this up." He nodded and left. Walter's house stood on the edge of the town's historic district, a modest white brick ranch with dark shutters, a wraparound porch, and a swing that creaked when the wind was right. Eli had never lived anywhere with a porch swing. The first night he didn't sleep well. The sheets were too clean, the mattress too soft, the silence unfamiliar. But Sonny curled up on the rug beside his bed and snored like a soft motor, and eventually Eli drifted off. They found a rhythm. Mornings started with walks. Walter using his cane, Eli holding the leash, Hannah usually beside them with coffee. Afternoons meant study hours at the dining room table. Walter tutored him in history, while Hannah corrected his grammar with a teasing smile. Evenings brought warm meals and quiet conversations under soft lighting. Eli's world, once defined by cold sandwiches and streetlights, now included roast chicken dog treats and books with his name written neatly on the first page. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky blushed lavender and rose, Eli sat on the porch, swing feet bare, elbows on knees. Sonny rested at his side head on Eli's foot-tail, swaying lazily. Walter dozed inside in his recliner. Hannah was in the kitchen, humming as she chopped something for dinner. Eli looked out across the yard. The world didn't feel so distant anymore. He reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a peanut butter and jelly sandwich he'd made himself. It was simple, wrapped in wax paper. He broke it in half, laid one piece on the porch for Sonny. The dog sniffed it gently, took it, then curled closer. Eli smiled to himself. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to belong, not just to someone, but to somewhere. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness, a shared sandwich, a second glance at a shivering animal can open the door to something far greater than we ever imagined. Eli didn't have much, but he gave what little he had with a heart full of compassion. And through that simple act, a lost dog found his way home, an old man found his memory, and a boy discovered what it truly means to be loved. This story reminds us that miracles don't always come in thunder and lightning. Sometimes they arrive in the form of a quiet bark in the rain or a warm hand offered at just the right moment. And perhaps those moments are not accidents, but the gentle touch of God weaving people together when they need each other most. So today, if you feel invisible, forgotten, or alone, remember Eli, Sonny, and Walter. Remember that heaven still moves in mysterious ways, and that a single choice can lead to healing, hope, and home. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs encouragement. Comment Amen if you believe in second chances and God's timing. Subscribe for more stories that bring light to the darkest days, and may God bless every heart that watches, shares, and believes.